He will be there.
When I call on his name,
He will be there.
my God forever the same. Through all the joy, through all the pain, say the word and I'll go where you want me to. Listen to me now.
Hello and welcome to the First 30 Days podcast. I'm Carrie Grant.
And I'm David Grant. And today we're going to be speaking about defining Jesus.
Now, our guest is one of our deep friends, lovely friends, the Reverend Andre Radmill. Andre is an Anglican priest, a Harley Street psychotherapist, a playwright, and a best-selling author.
Welcome,
Wow.
Andre.
Good to be here. Well done for getting through the
Yeah,
bio.
just getting through your bio. That's the end of the podcast, yeah.
So, Andre, today we're talking about defining Jesus. And some people have a very definite idea about who Jesus was. But when you read the Gospels, what comes through for you?
I think for me, there's three things that really ping out when I see Jesus in the Gospels. One is Jesus was super inclusive. The second is that I think he was a massive rule breaker. The third is that he was absolutely human in every way you could be human. So I think for me, those are the three things that immediately ping out at me.
Let me just pick up on that middle one, because that's not a phrase that you would associate with a religion, a faith, church. And, you know, for people starting out in their faith, if they're thinking, hang on a minute, he's a rule breaker, in what way? How do you mean?
Well, Jesus lived at a time where there were a lot of rules about how to approach God. There was lots of rules about how to be a good person. And they may well have been good intentions behind those rules, but actually at this point in time where Jesus was alive, those rules were actually pretty oppressive for people, and they were becoming a block between people and God. And Jesus came along and said, well, the key thing is about relationship with God and with one another, rather than these rules being the thing that will get you into God's favor, into being in a good position with God. And that was really quite revolutionary at the time to say
I guess
that.
because relationship is more nebulous, it takes time. Some people would say, but I like the rules. I want to know the right from the wrong. The rules are all here. I can fit in the box. That must have been a bit topsy-turvy, really a topsy-turvy world when Jesus came then and started saying, well, it's much more about knowing you and being in relationship with you.
Well, it was, and it was quite offensive for some people. It was certainly confusing for other people because this was what they'd grown up with. They thought that if you were to be a good person and to know God, you had to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And the problem with that, of course, is that people would fail to do X, Y, and Z on a regular basis. But Jesus comes along and says, no, it's actually about relationship, and it's about love, and it's about knowing one another and knowing God as friends and family. So his kind of emphasis shifted quite dramatically, not onto rules, but onto how to be family together, how to be community together. And that's what I mean by inclusive, really, was Jesus brought people into that community that would, according to the rules, have been outside the community. So that was very radical at the time.
Now, you talk about community and inclusive, but Jesus wasn't all sweetness and light, was he? As you read the Gospels, he was pretty hard on some people, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, I think he was particularly hard on just these people that were saying, in order to be in good books with God, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And if you don't do that, then you're in trouble and you are outside of acceptable behavior and you're outside the community in some sense.
Why do we get so caught up on behaviour? Behaviour seems to be the thing that, Christian or non-Christian actually, people are all about the behaviour. As a psychotherapist, you must see, you work with people's behaviours. So what is it that the Christian faith has to say that's perhaps different to what is out there, or is it all the same?
Well, I think a lot of times people get hung up on if I do this, then I'll be accepted. If I behave in a certain way with certain behaviors, then other people will like me, they'll approve of me, they'll reward me.
Mm.
And that may stem from family background. It could also be from the culture where if you don't do certain things, then you can easily be cancelled, for example. And I think that was common in Jesus's time, and it's also common now as well, that people still feel that behavior gets you to where you need to go. If you're thin enough, if you look the right way, if you've got enough followers, on
Mm.
social media, then you are in. And if you don't do that, you're kind of out.
Does the church have a version of that? The thin, the followers, the beautiful.
Yeah.
What's the church's one of that?
So for me, as somebody who became ordained in the Church of England, I definitely can see a pathway that if you were a really super good Christian, I'm only talking from my experience now,
Sure.
you might become a church leader. And if you're a church leader, then you are special because
Yeah.
you've attained the dizzy heights and climbed the mountain, from which point you can utter forth wonderful wisdom for people to grow and enjoy from. And
And
that's,
also speak a kind of funny language. There's a kind of Sunday language. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like people forget how to talk normally. Why can't
yeah.
we just talk normally about Jesus? Why do we have to have a funny language and kind of feel like almost like you're being on your best behavior rather than just show up as yourself?
Yeah, and be accepted for yourself as yourself. I think that a lot of that funny language stuff is because we've got this idea again that we have to perform in a certain way in order to be acceptable and to be loved.
So there were lots of things, obviously, in the time of Jesus that corresponded with exactly what you're saying. People had to behave in a certain way. They had to be ceremonially clean in a certain way, and all that.
Mm.
Are you saying that what Jesus purports to expect from people, or what he offers to people, isn't expressed in behaviorist terms, but it's something other than that?
Yeah, well, this is the flip side of it, which is that what Jesus was offering, I think, was relationship, and it wasn't dependent on behavior. It was really more about being known and knowing God and knowing that one is loved rather than having to jump over lots of hurdles to maybe be acceptable. So, what Jesus was doing, I think, was very much around building relationships, and it was focused on what's inside a person. He often talked about like what comes out from the inside is a bigger deal, really, than what that
Mm.
person might be doing externally in their behavior or in their actions. So he was, in some ways, I think, as a therapist, he was like an early psychotherapist in that way because
Yeah.
he was very interested in the heart and in what was going on inside somebody at a deeper level and would make space for that and would welcome that, even if it was in a bit of a mess. He made space for the mess and for the people who felt broken and that they were never going to be an insider by making space for that wonderful, chaotic mess that I think maybe we all have a bit inside us.
What was the response? You know, you talk about this relational Jesus and you talk about people that wouldn't normally be
Mm,
invited being let in and
mm.
being able to show up as themselves. What did the other people think about that? The people that weren't kind of, the people that were kind of perhaps viewing that, what would it have been like? I'm thinking about, you know, you're there by the Sea of Galilee or in Jerusalem. What were people thinking of him?
I think it would depend on who the people were that were seeing it. So I think for the everyday people that lived by the Lake of Galilee and the shepherds and those that were probably very clear about their position in society being at the bottom, they would have found this intriguing, exciting, and life giving to have a rabbi who wouldn't usually touch them with a barge pole
Yeah.
come into their area, into their culture and society, and listen and speak and be really hospitable to them. I think for other people who are a bit more tied up with the rules, they were really offended by this and kind of like, this shouldn't be happening. A rabbi shouldn't be talking to these people. They shouldn't have those sorts of people in their homes, prostitutes and
Yeah.
people who've been tax lenders. they should be above all of that.
Yeah, and also a ministry funded by women.
And a ministry funded by women, totally unacceptable. So there would have been a lot of judgment. There'd have been a lot of people trying to, as it were, cancel Jesus.
Yeah.
There'd have been a lot of people kind of writing angry tweets about Jesus, as it were. Like, who is this person and who do they think they are talking like this?
Yeah.
And of course, the most offensive thing in some cases would have been Jesus essentially saying that this is God on earth coming and talking to you.
Jesus was then, from the sound of it, the way you described Jesus, a complete non-conformist in his time. That being the case, how has the Christian faith come to be perceived by many as the very epitome of conformity?
Well, I think that happened a few years later where Christianity became essentially co-opted by the Roman Empire and then became the state religion. Now, I think when things happen like that and it becomes the state religion or the official kind of religion of the day, in a sense, that then becomes a bit more like what Jesus was pushing against, which was, that around here, these are the rules and you have to abide by them if you're going to get anywhere near God. And perhaps we put some intermediaries in the way as well, who you have to go through to get to God in terms of a certain type of priestly order. So I think that's what happens is that um, in history, you get to a point where the church becomes the in crowd, whereas really the church started as the out crowd. They were the ones who were on the run. They were kind of refugees. They were running from the authorities or hiding from them. They were definitely not the in crowd. They were meeting in small groups, in hidden places, doing amazing things. But of course, we now look at these great churches and cathedrals around the world and we
Dedicated
think,
to them, yeah.
yeah, dedicated to those guys.
Wowza. Do you have, if you think about your own Christian faith, do you have a story of Jesus or a part in Jesus that has most related to you?
Yeah. So for me, I think that the story that really sort of floors me is towards the end of John's Gospel, where you have this meeting point. It's early in the morning. Jesus has been crucified. The fishermen are out doing the job they were doing before. What else can they do? They don't know anything else. And one of the fishermen is Peter. And Peter said on the night that Jesus, was taken in to be eventually killed and crucified, he said he didn't know him. He didn't know anything about him. He was nothing to do with him. And he completely denied his relationship with him after saying he would follow him anywhere.
Mm.
So Peter must have felt terrible and must have felt like he was like the worst Christian sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then in that morning, Jesus makes fish and breakfast on the beach, and the fishermen come in, and Peter recognizes that it's Jesus. And with all his shame and all his guilt, he comes and sits down. And bearing in mind that he denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus asks him 3 times, "Do you love me?" And it's like a match striking and something igniting in Peter's heart, which is, I think he starts by feeling guilty and shamed and ends that little conversation
Yeah.
realizing that it's about love. It was never about doing the right thing. It was just knowing that he's still loved. So
I,
that really related to me.
I love the concept of the opportunity to have things turned around, to
Mm,
put things right.
mm,
And that isn't just something that's kind of slate clean. It's more than that, isn't it? Because he asks him 3 times, I'm coming in, I'm healing you with your own words. You are going to speak
mm,
the thing that will heal you with me. Because do you love me? Of course you love me.
mm.
You can hear all you're someone who's, you're the story, the narrative psychotherapist. The story there is so beautiful.
Yeah. And what I love about it is it's Jesus speaking into the place of hurt. Is Jesus knew that he was ashamed, knew that he just felt he'd let himself down and let Jesus down. And it's there that Jesus speaks into. I think for me, I've felt that many times, that where I've messed up and done things that I'm ashamed of or feel bad about, Jesus isn't just telling me to pull my socks up and get on with it. He's going, okay, I see that and
Yeah, I
I
get it.
embrace that.
Yes.
It seems that Jesus then met people exactly where they were
Mm.
in exactly the state they were, and didn't demand of them to be something other than they were in that space.
Mm.
He'd meet them where they were. Do you feel that the character of Jesus then is sometimes lost? The fact that people may feel as though they have to do something or be something other than they are in order for Jesus to sort of embrace them.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying earlier, I think that happens all the time, that people feel they're not going to be acceptable as they are, that they're very conscious of where they've messed up, where things have gone wrong, and they're going to try to fix that before they'll come back to Jesus. That was something I thought quite a lot when I first became a Christian, was that I'd made this commitment to follow Jesus. I'd said a prayer of commitment. And some of the people listening to this, you may have said the same thing. You may have made a decision, but I found that I messed up just as much as I did before I made that prayer.
Yeah.
And so what I tended to do was think, okay, I've got to fix this now and make myself right before I come back to Jesus and say, oh, sorry, I won't do it again. But actually what Jesus is inviting us into is we can come back to him the second it goes wrong, because he's already there anyway, and he already knows about what's happened, and he's ready to embrace us as we are, not as we think we should be.
Yeah, David and I often talk about the fact that people, humans, very rarely behave out of character, right? So if we know that, then if we are, rather than telling people how to behave, we are telling people who Jesus is, it stands to reason that Jesus will do that transforming work in people. And behaviors may change. They may not change, but there's more chance of them changing if that's what you want the end goal to be. I mean, I'm not up for that as the end goal. I'm just up for loving Jesus. But if people want to change behavior, telling someone to do something is not the way to do it. It's telling them who they are.
Yeah.
This is who Jesus is. You are so loved. You are worth it. You are gorgeous. Show up as yourself. All your mess, all of it is
Bring
like,
it with you.
and he's with you in that space.
Can I say, actually, to follow on from that, the thing that you refer to when you spoke about the story of Jesus meeting Peter after Peter had denied that he'd ever met him, the thing that strikes me about it, listening to you tell it, is that at no point did Jesus say to Peter, about the other day.
That thing you did?
Yeah.
You know,
I
can we
love the
just-
way he
can we just
handles
have a
it.
chat about that?
Do you love me? But do you love me? It's so human. It's so earthed.
And we're not going to go into all that stuff that
Yeah.
you did
No.
and what you said.
No, it's not like the Inquisition. It's not like we're going to sit down and tear it all apart.
And I'm going to correct you.
Yeah, like, wow, you can't. I don't know. I don't think people change if we try to tell them to change behavior. I just don't think that works. I gave up doing that as leaders of a church. We gave up doing that years ago. We don't tell people what to do. We tell them who Jesus is.
Yeah. And in doing that, I think we're also helping people discover who they are.
Absolutely.
Because in that kind of interchange, Peter is discovering more about who he really is, that, oh my gosh, I really do love Jesus.
Yeah.
And you know, what happens to
Realization.
Peter next?
Yeah.
That realization propels him into the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And into what he does next as a church leader. But it's all coming from the heart now. It's not coming from doing the right thing and being behaviorally correct.
Yes.
It's coming from his love, actually.
Yeah.
So as Jesus approaches us, and we know that we're being seen by him, that love is the thing that ignites change.
Now, in our first 30 days book, on day 5, we talk about what Jesus was like. Andre, would you mind reading it for us?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, what is Jesus like? Good relationships are about two-way loving, two-way trust, and truly knowing someone and being known. Trust can take time. We are taught, don't trust strangers. This is good advice. Who is Jesus? Jesus loved people. He hung out with the people no one else wanted to hang out with, the controversially marginalized. He gave value to women and children. He touched the untouchable and healed them. Every time religious people tried to catch him out, he came back at them with a profound statement that would turn everyone's thinking on its head. He brought people together, empowered them, and gave them purpose. His love allowed for difference, for character and personality to shine. He always valued the relationship over the rules, healing on the Jewish day of rest, not condemning people who were caught red-handed, letting the young gather to chew the cud with him. He loved the people, all people. He turned their world upside down, calling out hypocrisy and putting the heart back into the relationship. From his life-giving manifesto spoken through the Sermon on the Mount, to his upturning tables outside the temple, from the feeding of the hungry and healing the sick, to speaking in riddles that allow people to explore their own journey, from speaking to thousands, hanging on his every word, to him staying silent in front of those who had the power to stop his death, from his intimate, insightful, one-to-one conversations, to dying on the cross to save the world. Good relationships involve surrender, not a surrender that is commanded or covertly demanded. Jesus leads the way, saying, "Me first," then lays an invitation at our door. No forcing, free choice.
Thank you, Andre. What are your first thoughts when you read that?
I think when I read that, kind of what I've been saying earlier a little bit is that really we're talking about Jesus in relationship to other people, and that being critical to his whole ministry and to who he was, rather than abiding by a set of behavioral laws and rules and regulations. But the thing that keeps coming back to me is relationality and love and inclusivity again, because Jesus was reaching out to and embracing people who were not just on the outside as far as society was concerned, but they themselves probably felt on the outside, like they knew that they had failed according to the rules, and therefore they would have put themselves on the outside before anybody else did.
Hmm.
And these were the very people that Jesus invited in to eat with him. It was a very symbolic thing in this culture, who you ate with
Yeah.
and who you had around your table. And Jesus invited people around the table to eat with him that the religious authorities thought should never be anywhere near him because they would pollute him. But the weird thing about this is that the whole thing of being affected, polluted, brought down by bad people was reversed. The holiness in Jesus is what actually, in a sense, polluted them and the people around him. The holiness was really the issue, not them affecting him.
Yeah, it shone a light.
It shone a light. Yeah.
I think also Jesus challenges dualistic thinking. Talk me through that.
Yeah. So I think that Jesus, because he's fully human and fully God, that immediately breaks down dualism. I think oftentimes we think of like our humanity as being separate somehow to our spirituality. So we have this dualistic idea, and dualism just means essentially two things that are split apart.
Yeah.
We have this idea that there's all the mess that we live in our everyday human lives that somehow should be divorced from all that God stuff, because God doesn't want to see all of that.
Yeah, he can't bear it.
He can't bear to look at that, which is exactly the same thing as I was just saying about the table fellowship, that, some people shouldn't come in and pollute what's going on in this perfect world. And I think in dualism, we can do that to ourselves. We can say to ourselves, there's some bits of me that really nobody should see and have any awareness of. And we'll keep those out of the picture when we go to church, because we don't want anyone at church to know about that.
Yeah.
And God probably doesn't want to know about it either. So we end up living these dual lives where on one hand, we're being the good Christian and maybe we're doing really good things, but then there's all this other stuff that we're ashamed of that we keep right out of the picture. But what I feel about Jesus is that that's exactly the stuff that he already knows about, and B, he loves us within that area. So to move away from dualism means bringing the two things together, so that and I think this is where Jesus helps us, we can come to Jesus as we are, not as we think we should be.
But there is a thinking out there in Christendom, if we call it that things need to be boxed off, things need to be black and white, because that's really clear. That's love and hate, that's lies and truth,
Good and
and
bad.
good and bad,
Right and wrong.
the goodies and the baddies. What you're saying there is almost saying there might be grey. Are we allowed grey?
Well, I think the thing is that we live in the grey. That's where actual life happens. So the thing about the perfect life is an illusion. It doesn't actually exist. So if people are trying to live out this perfect illusionary life, it's like trying to live in a TV show that's not actually your life. It's like something else with a script written by someone else. It's got nothing really to do with your life. Now, that's not good for your mental health. In my experience as a therapist, this is where a lot of Christians get themselves into difficulties, is because they're trying to be something that they're not.
Yeah.
And then when they fail to do it, they feel terrible and guilty. Like what sort of Christian am I?
Yeah.
And this doesn't get talked about in church that much, or not as much as I think it could be anyway. So therefore,
Or sometimes the solutions are too quick.
Well,
They're like, oh, you've got a problem. You can get prayed for. Now you're fine.
yeah,
We're not allowed to sit in the muck and the mire or take 6 months to think about the one thing I'm having a crisis over. Maybe we need to just loosen it off a little bit and let people take their time, and it's okay.
Can I just say that this idea of people taking their time that Carrie just referenced seems to suggest that Jesus doesn't demand instant change. Would you say that the Bible supports that?
I don't really see much evidence of Jesus demanding people to make instant behavioral changes on the spot without really going through any kind of process. And certainly from a psychological point of view, I think that's probably a recipe for increased stress and people feeling worse actually about themselves because they failed again to do it. I think that there's a lot of stuff about Jesus walking with us and being the way and us going on a journey. I mean, that goes back into the Old Testament narrative as well, which to me makes more sense in terms of how change really works. If we want to change, we're going to go on a step-to-step journey,
Yeah.
probably through some very difficult desert type experiences, rather than kind of wake up or have a ministry time and suddenly everything's fixed.
So on the basis of that, what does it mean then in the places where Jesus said to people, go away and don't sin again, or sin no more, as it's written in Old English? What does that actually mean?
I think going away and sinning no more. I mean, we've got to think about what sin means there, which is quite a big kind of consideration. But I think, firstly, there's nothing to say that couldn't be a lifetime's work and a lifetime walking that out, what that
Yeah.
actually means in practice, to live the rest of one's life in a different way,
Yeah.
and a way that's more orientated around life and love and relationship than about whatever was going on before.
And if the word repent means change the way you think, then that's a great kind of request, right? I love that. Change the way you think. Okay, that's going to take time. That is a lifetime. That's the whole 9 yards. That's going to take a while.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the kind of root behind the word, for me, this is my personal opinion, around sin is also it's believing the illusion that we're separate from God, and therefore we're going to have to take matters into our own hands. To me, that's at the very, very root of it.
That's the opposite almost of what we think it is then.
Yeah.
What we've been told it is.
It's not just doing bad things, because I think that's just the fruit of it. But the actual core of this is believing a lie that we're separate from God, and we're back into the dualism thing again. And therefore, what if we're on our own? We're going to have to just take matters into our own hands. And then we go down the route of whatever it is we pick up to make ourselves feel better.
In the reading, there was also this lovely word that I want to highlight and ask what this word means to you. Jesus gave people purpose. What does purpose mean to you?
Yeah, so I think purpose springs out of knowing who we really are. I don't think purpose means a vision statement that we're trying to get towards in the future and that we're knocking ourselves out in the meantime to
Yeah.
try and achieve. And that often happens in churches, and it can often happen in business, and it can often happen in our personal lives as well. I don't think purpose is about sort of some abstracted idea of what we're supposed to be doing. I think it's about knowing who we are, and out of that will quite naturally flow certain things that we will probably really enjoy doing, actually. So for me, I really enjoy writing. I know that part of my purpose is to be a writer
Yeah.
because I've always written. I've always written journals, diaries. From day dot, I've been writing. So if you ask me what my purpose is, I don't know what the book's going to look like, but I do know that I'm a writer. So that's my purpose. A book would just be a product out of that or fruit of that. And I think we have purpose within us, but we don't always recognize it. And it sometimes pops up in moments in our lives that maybe we downplay a bit and think, oh, I'm not that person. I'm not supposed to do that. I
Yeah.
do really love it. I'm not really supposed to be doing that because I'm the wrong age or the wrong gender or I'm the wrong whatever. But I think it's in those magic moments that we can find our origin story, which is actually our true purpose. And the more we tap into that, the more alive things get.
We've got a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask you a little bit of your own personal story and what, in regard to purpose, but also knowing Jesus, just how you talked there about being a writer and, knowing that, but that's kind of, that may have taken a long while to really come out to its fullest kind of fruiting place,
Hmm.
bearing fruit place. So where did your journey begin, and how has Jesus affected it along the way?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, my journey, which is quite long now, began really in a very traditional way where I became a Christian at the age of 17 in terms of faith. And I, for many, many years, thought that I was supposed to be a certain type of person as a Christian, and I tried very hard to do it.
Yeah.
And I did climb that ladder to some extent and became a church leader. And then I kind of stepped out of that a little bit and went to a different community, which we were all part of, and discovered this relational aspect that we were talking about earlier, that it was more about being loved for who I was.
Mhm.
And I gradually found that I was dropping the burdens and these heavy clothes that I've been wearing of responsibility and leadership and whatever else, all these things that you're supposed to do. And I was encouraged to just do what was in my heart. And I realized that what was in my heart was to write a play.
Yeah.
And I wrote a play, and the rest is history in a way. But that only really came out of an environment that was very relational and where it wasn't just an abstract idea or a theological idea about Jesus loving and accepting me as I was. People were loving and accepting me as I was. And that triggered me going, and somebody literally asked me, what do you really most want to do? And I said, I want to write a play. And that's how it happened.
There's a couple of little bits that I love about Jesus, that the fact that he didn't have enough fish and enough loaves, the fact that there wasn't enough wine at the wedding. I love this idea that it's not all neat and ordered, and Jesus knows everything ahead of time. So I would think today in our churches, we'd be like, no, there's a whole row of tables. Here's all the lunch served up. It's all organized. Everything is really set and in place.
Structured.
It's structured, like, oh, where's Jesus? Oh, he's gone off in a boat. What's he doing now? He's gone off on the lake. Get him back. There's a load of people here that need to hear him talk. I love this idea that Jesus was Jesus scatty. I'm probably going to get shot down in flames for that. But a little bit like just kind of
Spontaneous.
spontaneous.
Well, I think Jesus wasn't really one who was going to be constrained by social sort of rules and niceties about what you do at a party and how to, you order in the right quantity of wine. And he just wasn't really I don't know that he wasn't concerned by it, but it just wasn't going to constrain him. It wasn't going to limit him. And I think he was kind of operating also in a way where he was listening to what his father was saying, and he was considering just what was really going on under the surface. So some of these things would have been bothering people because there were surface issues, and they would have been setting up rotas and having people come in and complaining and getting on the phone to someone. But he was really just about what's really going on, because he was listening to his father, but he was also listening to the people and what they really needed.
And perhaps listening to his own body needing rest.
Yeah. Well, this is where I said at the beginning that Jesus was very human. Jesus was someone who slept. He did all the human functions that human beings do, and he needed time to rest. And he would leave the party, go, as you say, go wandering off onto the beach, get into a boat. He just took the time that he needed to maybe connect with his father, but I think also just to sleep, to recover, and to rest after doing lots of stuff that which we're more familiar with, perhaps.
There's a real informality in so many of Jesus's interactions with people as well, isn't there? Like he's sitting needing water, so he starts talking to somebody who's drawing up water. You know, when he's with people, he talks about coins and weddings and shepherds and lost sons and things like that. Do you understand, in your own understanding of Jesus, that he was more informal, spontaneous, and relational than ceremonial and formal and structured?
Yeah, I think that he was aware of the ceremonies, and I think he knew about the structures, but don't think he was at all constrained by it or limited by it. And some of the stuff that he did, like talking to the woman at the well, would have been so far off the grid of what he was supposed to be doing as a male rabbi,
Yes.
that the structure was just a dot in the distance in his rearview mirror by that stage. He was not part of that. But what he was doing, he was again relating to a human being and talking to somebody using language, and you could call them metaphors, but they're also true. There was a bucket and there was water, and he was talking about water, but he was talking about a different kind of water that person could have access to, which was the water of life. But it starts with talking about buckets and water and wells. So yeah, he's totally in the everyday informality of life, but he's taking it also somewhere else as well.
Can we contextualize it then, just for me? If Jesus was around walking the earth now, conducting his ministry now, where do you think we'd find him?
Good question.
Well, I think he could be and is actually everywhere and anywhere, but I think we could find him. I would be expecting to see Jesus interacting with people on social media. I'd be expecting to see Jesus interacting with people in the media. I'd be expecting to see Jesus interacting with sport and people who go to football matches, and probably hanging out at football matches, actually. Don't know which team he'd support, but that's another thing.
Arsenal, we know that.
Obviously Arsenal.
Yeah.
Liverpool.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Things just took a turn, David. Yeah, I think he'd be in all of those places where people are.
Our thanks go out to the Reverend Andre Radmill for being with us today.
Yay.
Thank you so much. And
you.
this is just day 5 in our 30 Days of Walking with Jesus book, which you can get from any online store and even actual bookshops.
Well, maybe not any online store.
Any online bookstore.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, probably not a place where you buy shoes, but books, on the other hand, that's where you definitely find it.
Thank you for listening.
The first 30 Days of Walking with Jesus is available in bookstores, online and audiobook. For more information, please visit spckpublishing.co.uk. You have been listening to a Monkey Nut podcast.